Hello everyone, and welcome back to this last session of What Matters Most. In this particular lesson, we're going to look at serving together. What does it mean to serve together? I'm going to start in the Bible focus section. In 1 Peter 4:10 through 11, it says, "Each of us should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as a faithful steward of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides. So in all things, God may be praised through Jesus Christ." What these verses speak to me is that when we serve others, that we're actually serving God. That we're actually loving God when we're serving others. But sometimes we get the idea that we're just serving because there's a need, or we're filling a slot, or something needs to be done. But these verses remind us that when we serve, we're actually loving God. When we serve others, we're loving God. And so that's a perspective that the Lord wants us to bring. Now, in this particular aspect, we oftentimes serve individually, but I want to change your thinking to say, how can we serve as a group, or how can we serve as maybe a team of individuals within the group? Not just as individuals, but how can we maybe group up in twos and threes and serve together, or maybe the whole group together? So that's kind of the understanding that I want to bring to this lesson. One more verse before we get into 1 Corinthians 13. Galatians 6:2 says this, "Love empowers us to fulfill the law of Christ as we carry each other's troubles." Again, that verse reminds us that we fulfill the law of love as we help one another in their hardships in life. Now I want to come and read in 1 Corinthians 13, the last two verses in this chapter. "Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. Until then, there are three things that remain: faith, hope, and love. Yet love surpasses them all. So above all else, let love be the beautiful prize for which you run." I love those translations because they remind us that really our life here is about love. Loving God and loving others. And how do we do that together? Well, a couple of things that I want to bring before you. First of all, discovering where to serve in a church is a process. It's not just signing up for something that needs to be done or asking around. It really is a process. The process really starts when we become available. You see, we have a value here at this church that people that come in, they may have something on their heart, but they might not have the skills or the ability to do that well. And we like to coach them into improving their skills and improving their ability and knowing that they have a passion for it. And so we're not expecting people to come in and serve with perfection and serve with professionalism. No, we believe that God puts a passion on people's hearts, and we discover that together. And again, it's a process. You might be in 2 or 3 different areas before you actually find the place where that you actually will serve maybe more on a long-term basis. Generally, people have a passion, or they're passionate about something. And that's often the case. Maybe you can identify that now, and maybe that needs to be somewhat of a discovery. What are you passionate about? And so that, again, is a process of discovery. I'm told that my great-grandmother served in the preschool class. She taught the preschool class in her church for 40 years. Can you imagine? Well, I'm sure she was passionate about it. And there was a need, for sure, for the preschoolers to be taught. And she served in that capacity for 40 years. They said when she finally passed away, that at her funeral there was standing room only, because these children were impacted by her passion to teach them at that age category in their life. They were impacted. And so when she passed away, again, they wanted to show honor to her. So just an example of that when you're passionate about something and you kind of search around, it starts with a need, but then it ends up in a calling that you have in your life. And I say that here, your passion combined with a need produces a calling for you. I look at the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1, verse 1. Notice it says Paul, he's talking about himself, Paul, a servant of Christ, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God. And so Paul didn't start out after he became born again as an apostle. He started out serving. And that's where he started. That's where I started. I didn't start out just, pop out of school and become a pastor. No, I served. I served in high school in my local church. When I went to college, I served in the church. Even the church that I became a pastor in later, I started serving. That was the place. I just loved God and I loved people, and I started serving. And then there was a point in time where God says, okay, spoke to my wife and I about setting ourselves apart again to get more schooling, and then I came back and served as a pastor. But we all begin at that place of serving, and that's where it starts. That's where the Apostle Paul started. That's where I started. That's where you start. In fact, that's where Jesus started. You see, in number 2 there, Jesus taught that serving others had the greatest reward. Now, that's not how the world teaches us that the greatest reward. They think the greatest reward is to be the president or the CEO and to be at the top and to have the title. But that's not the way Jesus teaches is the greatest thing we can do. In fact, he said the greatest thing that we can do is to serve. In Mark chapter 10, verse 43 through 45, he writes this. He says, "You are to lead by a different model. If you want to be the greatest one, then live as one called to serve others. The path to promotion and prominence comes by having the heart of a bondslave who serves everyone. For even the Son of Man did not come expecting to be served by everyone, but to serve everyone and to give his life as a ransom price in exchange for the salvation of many." You see, even Jesus, the Son of God, came from heaven. He should have been, if anybody, he should have been the one that deserved to be served. And yet that wasn't his purpose. That wasn't his mission. His mission is, I came to serve everyone. I came to serve everyone else. I didn't come with the expectation that people would serve me. I came with the mission to serve others. And therefore, in us loving God, we should also have the mission to serve others. And in doing so, we are expressing the love of God to them. Number 3, people who serve on a regular basis have the following characteristics. In other words, if you are serving in a church or organization on a regular basis, you generally have these kind of characteristics. First of all, you've made yourself available. And that's really important. When something comes up, I can do that. And you just, again, serve and as you have time and availability. The second thing is that people that volunteer a lot, they learn to work as a team. There's no lone rangers in the kingdom. We are all called to work together. Even Jesus, when he sent out his disciples to do something new they'd never done before, he sent them out 2 by 2. He sent them out as a team. And Jesus had a team around them. He had his 12 disciples that they did certain things together, and he rarely did anything on his own without having 1 or 2 or 3 of his disciples around him. And so, again, we should have that understanding that we serve together, not as just as individuals, but as a team. Now, when you work together as a team, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 16 tells us, "From him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work." You see, that verse begins to communicate to us that when each person does what they're supposed to do, that we actually have a greater whole. And we started out in 1 Corinthians 13 talking about that we see in part and we don't have the complete picture. But it says that as Jesus comes, that He's going to show us more. And the beauty of working together and showing God's love and expressing that by working together is really demonstrating more of God's love than if we're trying to do something by ourselves. And then the other thing that I mentioned here is that it's important when we serve to have a higher goal. In other words, we're not just doing a job. We're not just filling a slot. We're not just doing it because somebody asked us to or somebody told us to. Our church began in rented facilities, and we had to set up and tear down every Sunday, and that can become old and monotonous. But one of the things the Lord spoke to me early on is really this higher goal principle here. He said that as you set up and tear down, remember that there will be one person that will come today that may receive Jesus. One person that may get set free. One person that may receive an understanding of God that they never had before. And so it's worth it, what you're doing and how you're serving. And I kept that higher goal in mind all the way through. It was like a 7-year process. And I never burned out because I kept that proper understanding that my serving was a higher goal. It was about loving God and about loving others and expressing it that way. Hebrews 10:24 says this, "Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds." Do you hear that? Ouch! How we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. That's working together. The last thing that I want to mention in serving together, loving God by serving one another, is that people who make themselves available, that they will do any task with equal dedication. It doesn't make any difference if it's mopping the floor or teaching a class or giving someone a ride or having the opportunity to preach. Whatever the task is needed, whatever's available, that they do it with equal dedication. Now, some things can be planned. Other things are spontaneous. I believe that we should do both. That we should plan our schedules and say, hey, I can serve here and not here. But also that we should be available spontaneously when something comes up to say, I can do that. Again, it's just a mindset that we carry, that realizing that as we are serving others, we are loving God. And the world doesn't have that viewpoint. The world says, you do what you do for yourself and not for others. But in the kingdom of God, it actually says that when we serve, we're adding to the whole. We're expressing more of God's love when we work together and serve together than if we're just trying to do something ourselves. Hebrews 6:10 and 11 says this, "For God is not unfair. He will not forget how hard you have worked for Him and how you have shown your love to Him by caring for other Christians, as you still do. Our great desire is that you would keep right on loving others as long as life lasts." What a great verse. That we would keep on loving others, that we'd keep on serving others as long as life lasts. That we would realize that we have a passion that God has put into us, and to discover that. To realize that where we find our place to serve is a process. It's not something that where we start out is where we'll end up. But we stay in there, we plan things, and we become spontaneous as well. And in the process that we are displaying the love of Christ and how we are serving others. Well, that wraps up this last session of What Matters Most here in working together. And so I invite you to enter in the discussion questions and have some prayer time together. And again, I'm going to come back and just at the practical section, we'll talk about what ways that I'm encouraging you to express love and what's next. So we'll see you in a bit. All right, I'm back here for the Practice Together section. And I want to just, again, remind you that we oftentimes talk about doing things individually. How can we do things together? And that takes communication and coordination. But as you move forward, again, it's so vital that people begin to see it's not just one person, but it's a team of people working together that displays more of the fullness and the love of God to them. And so I've listed there for you some things that you might be able to do as a group. I want to remind you about the Love Does project for the community. I trust that that's coming along well. Maybe you've already scheduled it and you've coordinated that, but just a reminder that in session 3 that we talked about that and gave you an outline to begin to organize that, and I trust that that's set in motion. In the next several weeks you'll be able to do that. And then I want to leave you with, I really encourage you to come back for a bonus meeting. And in the bonus meeting, what I'd like you to do, I have a sheet there that is kind of outlines a bonus meeting, but I really want you to just come and talk about things that you've learned through the whole 5 weeks. What's one thing that is still sticking with you, that God is encouraging you to practice as you practice in your life what matters most? And that certainly is to love God and love others to a greater degree. And then I want you to talk about your Love Does project. How did that impact you as you did that? And what did the people say back to you as a result of you coming and just loving on them? So again, that's it. Thanks for joining in this 5-week series. And we trust that as you've talked together, prayed together, shared together, that this idea of what matters most and how you can express love to one another, to your church, and to your community is something that will become a part of your life on a regular basis. Not just something that we did for the 5 weeks and then leave it and move on to something else, but truly something you begin to enter into your life and your group and your family and your church to, again, just expand the kingdom of God with love. God bless you.